Today I'm going to be testing a really cool broadhead that's hit the market recently from Bishop Archery. And Bishop Archery is a relative newcomer to the broadhead industry, but they've produced a couple broadheads specifically made out of this S7 tool steel that is like no other steel that any broadhead has ever been made out of. And I'm pretty excited about this. I didn't purchase this broadhead, nor am I sponsored by Bishop Archery, but I actually won it just in a random lottery contest on Archery Talk, an online forum. And so I was lucky enough to get this broadhead. This is their dicing drill broadhead, as they call it. They have two models, the dicing drill and the scientific method. So kind of new fangled names there, not going with the typical killer bee or rip 'em wide or stuff like that broadheads that you hear. So dicing drill and scientific method. The dicing drill is shown here is their smaller one. It ranges in weights from 100 grains up to 150 grains, and their larger dicing drill goes up to 630 grains for a heavy, dangerous game with really thick hides to penetrate through. So what makes these broadheads unique is, one, like I said, the steel that it's made out of. Two, they're single bevel, but they're not only single bevel, they're 0.72 inches thick single bevel. They have no blood letting grooves on them, so they're absolutely smooth and very smooth transitions. One-piece construction. They're machined out of a solid piece of this S7 tool steel. Now what makes the S7 tool steel so unique is that it allows the steel to be heated to a Rockwell hardness of 58 and yet not become brittle. Now that's really unique. If you look at most carbons and stainless steels, once they get to a Rockwell hardness that intense of 58, then they're going to chip pretty easily. They get pretty brittle and they can fracture. So a lot of stainless steels will go down to a Rockwell hardness of even like 48 or maybe in the low 50s, and that's the best they can do without getting too brittle. But the S7 tool steel is such a quality steel that it's designed to prevent chipping and breaking even at this super high Rockwell hardness. Now where that comes into play specifically is with a single bevel. So a single bevel broadhead, the way it's designed, if you can see here, and I'll zoom in so you can see it more closely, it just means it's sharpened on one angle. Okay, so it's a one angle head, like that one angle sharpening, versus a double bevel, as most broadheads are. They're sharpened like equally on both sides. This goes in at a 40-degree bevel, and with it being 0.72 inches thick, it allows that to be pretty stout. Okay, and it comes to the single bevel head right there, the single bevel tip. But most single bevel heads, the advantage with them is, because it's single beveling, once they hit the animal, the arrow is already spinning quite a bit from the vanes. But once it hits the medium, hits an animal in a hunting case, it causes, this blade beveling causes the head to continue to rotate into the game. Now what that does is it accomplishes two primary things. One, or I guess three primary things. One, it creates a wound channel like that, a spinning wound channel, rather than just a slit. Two, if it goes through soft material like lungs or intestines or even tissue or hide, it goes through and it twists. And that causes the effect not unlike if you take a fork and you just cut spaghetti with it versus spin the fork and wrap the spaghetti around it, then cut it. You're going to cut a lot more tissue, a lot more spaghetti, with the spaghetti tightly wrapped around the spun fork. And so what happens is this spins through tissue, it kind of wraps around it as it cuts it, and it gets a bigger cut than just a two bevel slit incision would make. Then the third thing that a single bevel does is that when it hits a hard medium like a bone and it hits it, it's rotating at such a degree that it hits it and causes a twisting force. You get a torsional force on that, which really aids in bone splitting. Not just the split caused from the incision itself, but the split caused from the incision and the rotation of the blade. And so you see this on dangerous game a lot of times with a big single bevel head. You get an incredible rotating force causing a bone split way larger than just the size of the cutting diameter itself, as you would get more readily with a double bevel head. So those are the three advantages, and there's probably others, three primary advantages of a single bevel head. But the problem with the single bevel head is because it's rotating like this, you get two things that happen as a result. One, this rotating edge is really put to the test because it's absorbing, that one edge is absorbing a lot of pressure as it's cutting into difficult mediums like a bone or a shoulder joint or something like that. And that bevel, that edge, that leading edge, can tend to chip away. The other thing can happen is it can put so much pressure from that spin on the ferrule that it can shear off at the ferrule. But when you use S7 tool steel, the theory is that it's such an incredible steel, it's so superior to everything else, that this edge is not going to chip, it's not going to fracture, and you're not going to get this shearing off because of the rotation. So in effect, you get all of the pluses of a single bevel head with none of the minuses. That's the theory behind the single bevel and the S7 tool steel head combination. Now this one comes, as I said, this is the dicing drill. It's their lighter weight model, and this one is in a 125 grain version. These dicing drills are 1 1/8 cutting diameter, so modest or kind of average cutting diameter right there at the base. They're also sharpened on the rear edge, also in the same single bevel. So you're not going to get this head coming in and bouncing out. It's not going to punch out. That's not uncommon with animals. I've had it happen even with 3 and 4 blade heads. They go in, the animal moves, it pressures, it jumps or something like that, it lurches, and the head pops out. With this rotating, it's not going to pop out, but if you do get a pressure coming back out, it's going to be cutting it, again, in the same rotating way, so it's going to do damage on both ends. That's the theory behind it. It's also, as you can see, it's got a pretty stout tanto point to it. It's short overall in its profile, and the tanto point, I'll zoom in here so you can see it. It looks like it's not pointed at all across the top. It looks like it's just flat. It's not really flat. It's just got another single bevel going each direction to cause that tip. So it's kind of a cool design here. And I'm going to put it through the ringer, all right? I'm going to put it through because I got it free. They're normally pretty expensive. They're like $50 per head. Okay, so $50 per head, not like 50 for 3, but 50 per head. Because this S7 tool steel is so difficult to machine, the tools that machine the Broadhead actually wear out, so it's really costly to produce, and that's what makes it somewhat prohibitive. But Bishop Archery has figured out a way to do it. It just costs you $50 a pop. It's up to you to decide if it's worth it. I'm going to put it through the ringer and see how well it does in fact hold an edge. Now let me add that these tests that I'm going to be doing are, they're not going to be based on flight. There's other tests that I do for long-range flight. I think with this Broadhead, it's constructed so extremely well. It's machined so precisely. I weighed it. It weighs right in at the exact amount as advertised, and it has such a short, low profile. I have no doubt that through a well-tuned bow, which mine is, with the right spining of arrow and with a decent shooter, that you're going to get really excellent flight. So maybe another day I'll test it for that, but that's not really my concern. My concern is to do tests that do two things. One, that test the edge retention, and then 2, that test the rotation. I want to see how well this 72nd of an inch thickness is, with this 40-degree bevel, is going to rotate inside of a medium, and then I want to test how well it really retains that edge. Is it worth the S7 tool steel? Does it make a big difference? So I'm going to put it through one test, like 20 layers of cardboard, to see if I can see some rotation. I'm going to shoot it through a pumpkin to see if I can get some rotation in that. Then I'm going to shoot it through a few different types of wood to see how it works in splitting and how it works in rotation in the wood. And then I'm also going to shoot it through some real test material, if you will, from a boar that I shot a while back. Put it through some meat of the boar and a shoulder, and put it through some the big rib of a boar. See how it handles on bone like that. And then I'm going to shoot it through some steel plating to see how well it holds an edge. So again, let's see what happens here with all of these different tests. Oh, and I'm shooting with it a 485 grain arrow. It's an Axis arrow out of my Hoyt Carbon Spider 30, which is set at 73 pounds. My draw length is only 26.5 inches. Okay, my first test here is going to be at this funky looking target under the deck in my backyard. This is my testing range. And what I'm doing here is not so much testing penetration, but I want to see if I can see the wound channel, the rotation of the wound channel that this head is going to create in about 20 layers of cardboard here. Okay, so you can see the arrow went in here with the broadhead vertical, and through 20 pieces of cardboard stacked together, taped together, about 3.5 inches of cardboard here. The head rotated about 45 degrees. So that's pretty impressive. I don't know what to really compare that to. I know if it were a double blade, it wouldn't have rotated at all. So we get somewhat of a wound channel. I'm going to put it through this 1/2 inch of plywood. Okay, so here I'm zooming in on the hole, and you can see right through it. See the broadhead went in right there, made its vertical cut, punched a hole right through as expected. Turn it around on the back, and you get quite an exit. Of course, to be expected with plywood, I suppose, but that rotation has got to help with that as well. Okay, so my next test, I put 2 of these 1x4 boards together, taped them together next to my Reinhardt, and just because I want to see how much I can destroy my Reinhardt. Okay, I'm getting kind of bugged by this. There's a limit to how many tests I'm going to do. Okay, here we go. I pulled it apart, and thankfully it didn't damage my Reinhardt because it didn't go all the way through. However, you look at this. Okay, this was set this way. The arrow hits right there, creates 2 different splits in the wood. You see that? Let me angle it. You see those 2 different splits right next to each other. Interesting. And this bottom split, my goodness, just literally took the board apart. And it goes through and poked through the back, and right there above that knot, you can see the blade if you looked really closely. That's the blade right there. But look at the second board is split all the way as well. Okay, next item that I'm going to test here is a big pumpkin. Just got this fresh from Safeway, and it's a big round one. I took the top off but did not hollow out the inside because I want to see if perhaps it shows the rotation of a single bevel. One of the advantages of a single bevel head is its rotation and the wound channel it creates, which is, one, supposedly really effective at splitting bone, and we saw that with some of the wood that we split, but 2, it's also supposedly effective at kind of tangling up the guts, the lungs, the innards of a deer, and then cutting them. Kind of like the way Dr. Ashby described it is if you took a fork and stuck it into spaghetti and you turned it all around and tightened a bunch of spaghetti onto that fork and then cut it, you'd be cutting a lot more than if you just put a knife through it. So I don't know if this is going to be like the perfect test of that, but it'll be interesting to see if we can see some of that taking place. Certainly we should see some of the rotation through a thicker medium of do that single bevel, but I wonder if we'll also be able to see some of the extra cutting of the pumpkin innards, as it were. So let's give this a whirl. Okay, so I'm going to need some more work to pull this out of the Reinhardt. It's just really hard. It rotates so much, even inside of that tight foam. target that I just can't get it out, but I want to point this out before I start really doing some work on it. The broadhead went in. You can see the cut at 45 degrees to the left, and you can see where it went in to the Reinhardt. If you can see that, try to get the camera in there. You can see it went 45 degrees to the right. So we got at least a 90-degree rotation. Okay, so maybe the best testimony of all about the rotation of these heads is in the Reinhardt itself, because this didn't go through a bunch of wood first. This went straight through the pumpkin and then into the Reinhardt, and it's really interesting. It was pretty hard to get that out. I mean, it took everything I had to pull it out. So let me back off here. So you can see it went in at this angle. This is the way the target was lying. It went in at this angle, and that was the 90-degree rotation from the entrance of the pumpkin. So it turned 90 degrees in the pumpkin, but then in the amount it penetrated into the Reinhardt, which was significant, it turned another 90 degrees. So when I'm pulling it out, I'm literally pulling through this 90 degrees. So this rotation from here to here, the blades, this rotation from here to here happened within the Reinhardt, and made it extremely difficult for this to come out. If you don't get a pass through, this air is not coming out of an animal. It's going to stay in there and keep working its damage. And with the sharpened, also single beveled back ends, it's going to cause quite a bit of damage rocking and rolling inside of there. So incredible wound channel. From the tests I've done with the Helix, it's a much greater rotation than the Helix. I don't have that to prove right here, but I have done similar tests. I've shot the Helix into this exact target. Believe me, it was nowhere near as difficult to get out. It just didn't rotate as much. Now within the pumpkin itself, I talked about how a single bevel can tangle up like a fork going into spaghetti, a bunch of the guts, the intestines, the lungs, whatever, and cut a lot more tissue than just a double bevel would. It's hard to show it from this angle. I'd have to shove my camera really down deep into the pumpkin. I'm not inclined to do that, but perhaps you can see the hole. I haven't doctored this in any way, below that big seed. Let's see if we can. The wound channel down in there, if you can see my finger, that's the exit wound channel where it was going, starting to go out. So it's interesting. It did create, I mean, there's no other holes like that. It created a hole that's pretty big. It's not just a slit. I mean, there you go. That's probably the best view of all. It created a definite hole of cutting a bunch of this pulp stuff of the pumpkin. Okay, the next test we're going to do is on a stack of 10 pieces of laminate tile. And this tile, you know, you wouldn't think it's a very imposing medium to try to penetrate through. And maybe in some ways it's not. But it does do a number on blades, and I've seen a number of blades go through this kind of medium or begin to penetrate it and get severely nicked up. So I'm anxious to see what happens with the Bishop dicing drill on a stack of 10 tiles here. Let's see what happens. The exit there made quite a bit of a hole. You can see again, similar to the plywood, it has a kind of an explosion. Okay, I found something pretty interesting as I was pulling these tiles apart that I shot earlier. The hole of the Exodus versus the hole of the Bishop dicing drill. And it's interesting because this was the second to last of the 10 tiles. This was number 9. And this was the entrance on number 9. And look at the Exodus. I mean, it punched like a 12 gauge slug hole. It's weird. I mean, it just made a full-on hole. But as I look at the Bishop, it made a much bigger area, much bigger break. And I mean, this is like bigger. If you compare the two, it's definitely bigger. It doesn't have that punch hole, but you can look at the fracture in so many different directions for a two blade, and one can only conclude that that's from the rotation. So that's what, you always hear about a single bevel versus a double bevel. A double bevel is going to make a hole the size of the diameter, basically. But a single bevel, if it hits bone, or if it ties up or tangles up those innards, lungs, guts, even skin, it twists them around and it makes a much bigger hole than the diameter would suggest. So here you see it proven out in a fairly dramatic way. That's cool. Okay, now we're going to get a little more real world. You go, what the heck is that? Okay, these are some ribs from a massive hog that I shot earlier this year. Well, I got a rib. That's cool. Okay, cut the rib right in half. Doesn't look like it had any problem penetrating. Great, it's going to be impossible to pull through my Reinhardt again. Oh, that's cool. Let me pull the camera over here. Hoping not to get trigonosis here as well. So, with the rib was stationed like that and got an angled cut. You can see it's not quite horizontal, that cut. But just in going through that one rib, you look at where it penetrated. Let's see if you can see that. I don't know if it's coming out in the camera. Anyway, yeah, you can see it. It penetrated. It's exactly, the entrance is exactly horizontal from where this is. So, well, it's almost exactly horizontal. So there was rotation even just through this one rib here. Okay, this is a shoulder roast of that same hog that I shot. It's a big chunk of the shoulder roast, and I'm sacrificing this meat, which actually for a 750-pound boar, man, this meat is phenomenal. It tastes so good. So it was a big sacrifice. But I got it propped up on top of the ribs that I shot, propped up on the boards that I shot, propped up on the tile that I shot, and I put a board behind it because I'm tired of having to dig it out of my Reinhardt. So hopefully that'll stop it. But I'm going to see if we can establish some sort of a wound channel inside just pure meat itself. Let's see. Okay, well that certainly looked impressive, splitting that wood apart. I wouldn't have imagined it would do that, but it busted that wood. Dang. So after going through, what do we got, about 7 inches of muscle there, it just blew that board in half. And great, now it's embedded in my Reinhardt again. Okay, so here's what we got this time. The Bishop went in at that angle. You can see it like a 45-degree angle into the meat. And it's hard to see on the exit, but it came out, well, you can see it better here. It came out and went into the target on this cut, completely vertical. So it went in vertical. So it rotated over 90 degrees inside the beef, and then when I pulled it out, it pulled out below here. So it had rotated another over 90 degrees. Well, yeah, right through there, about 90 degrees. Rotated 90 degrees. Man, keep moving the camera. So it rotated a little over 90 degrees through the meat, and then it rotated another 90 degrees inside the Reinhardt after passing through the 1x1 board. Rotation and penetration are phenomenal. Okay, this test, what I'm using here is I'm using a steel plate. This is just weldable steel, and it's 22 gauge, and I'm just going to shoot into it and see what it does to the edge of the broadhead, and then just keep shooting it, see what happens. I've got a board behind it. I've got 10 tiles in between the steel plate and the board. Got my Reinhardt behind that. I'm trying to protect my Reinhardt. I found that, man, every time I shoot something, it goes right through into the Reinhardt, and because of the rotation, it pulls a giant chunk out of the Reinhardt every time I pull it out, and it's like crazy hard to pull it out each time. So I'm hoping this will keep it from going into the Reinhardt. Let's see what happens. Well, I kept it from going into the Reinhardt, and it went through the steel plate right there, went through 10 layers of tile, and went through this half-inch plywood, and it's poking out the back. It just splintered the back, but kept it out of the Reinhardt. Okay, let me pull it apart. Okay, so here we are, 10 shots through the 22 gauge steel plate. Those are all the entrance wounds. It's kind of cool to see how the blades are offset. You notice that? They advertise that the offset single bevel, and you can see that upon penetration, great outlines of the blades. On the back side, you can see the holes that they open up there. They not only penetrated that with ease, but they went through, I had to put 10 layers of cardboard in there, 10 tiles, and then into the wood every time, just to prevent it from going into my Reinhardt again, which is pretty abused after all this testing. So this head that you're looking at here, let me zoom in, it's honestly, it's like it was straight out of the package. I've not touched it up. It's gone through 10 layers of 22 gauge steel. It's gone through, oh gosh, probably now over 100 layers of cardboard, 100 plus layers of cardboard. It's gone through well over 100 tiles. It's gone through probably 6 inches total of wood. No, more than that. More than a foot of wood. It's gone into my Reinhardt multiple times. It's even gone through a pumpkin. It's gone through a 750-pound hog rib. It's gone through a bunch of meat from the shoulder of that hog. And this thing spins true. It's just, you know, flying great, albeit these are relatively short distances, but I'm sure it would be flying great. And this edge, it's just not moved. It still is cutting nail off of my thumb. So I'm done shooting it through crap because it's just costing me too much money, and I really don't think it's going to affect this head. I even saw on their website they had a picture of this exact head, not this one, but this model had the dicing drill, that had gone through a buffalo something, scapula or something, buffalo bone, over 100 times, and it looked brand new. I don't doubt it one bit, seeing what I've put this one through myself. So with my testing, I have to conclude this is the most durable edge retaining head that I've ever seen in the market, that I've ever tried, that I've ever tested. Absolutely unbelievable. After all that I've put it through, that it would spin this true, that the edge would show not even the slightest nick or dent, or it wouldn't bend, is impressive. You're going to pay $50 for a head. That's what you would expect from a $50 head. So you have to determine, you know, is that worth it for you? I'll tell you what, you won't ever have to worry about replacing blades. I imagine it's easy to sharpen because it's a single bevel at such a great thickness and simple 40 degrees. I don't think that, though I haven't had to sharpen it, I don't think that would be that difficult to sharpen. But it is an amazing head. If you're going to want to shoot something that you know is going to go through bone, and you know you can use one broadhead until you lose it in the woods, then man, this is the broadhead that you're going to want to use. If you want to go after dangerous game, maybe if I'm going after Cape Buffalo and Mozambique, which I have on the horizon, this is going to be the head that I go to. Probably their scientific method to get a little more grains out of it, and a little less steep cutting angle. But if you're going after something big like that, or going after Australian buffalo, Asian buffalo, something big on the planet that is worth the money, and you want no broadhead failure, this is a no fools, no broadhead failure broadhead. Is it necessary for whitetail deer or, common, kind of thin-skinned game in North America? Probably not necessary. But for broadhead junkies, or those who are looking for something that's going to penetrate extremely well and cause incredible damage and be used over and over and over again, it's worth a look. Thank you to Bishop Archery. Thanks for giving me this free head, and thanks for the opportunity to test it.